AIT, Advanced Individual Training. It's episode 3, and welcome to the Mike Murphy podcast as we continue on with my 32-year journey of the military. And again, thank you for tuning in. So what exactly is AIT? So AIT is the school that soldiers go to after basic training. So for me, if you remember, I was at Fort Bliss for basic training, and then I flew to Fort Rucker, Alabama for my advanced individual training. And because I belonged to the 147th Aviation out of Madison, and they had helicopters, my military occupational specialty, my MOS, what I was going to be trained to do, was 67 Victor, which is Army Aviation for Scout helicopters. And I'll post a picture of a Scout helicopter, which years ago, when it was still in use, was used for aerial reconnaissance, security and escort, coordination with ground units. And like I said, that helicopter is now retired, and a 67 Victor today is actually a veterinary specialist. So again, I went to school for AIT, went to Fort Rucker, 9 weeks down there. It's the beginning of March 1988. And here we go. So what I recall from my flight from Atlanta to Rucker, I was on a small prop plane, and I had fallen asleep, long day. And when we landed, that woke me up. And when they opened the door, the first thing I could smell was the grass. I hadn't been around grass for, 2-3 months, 2.5 months. And I could smell that strong, wonderful smell of grass, and it felt so good. It felt like I was back in the Midwest. Went into the airport. There was nobody from Fort Rucker around. Usually they have a welcome or reception desk, and nobody was there. So I'm kind of making my way around the airport, carrying my bags in my Class A uniforms, and uniform. And I made a phone call, tried to call Scott. Nobody answered, and so I was standing there. And fortunately, there was an Army captain who I believe was on the same plane with me, and he was there with his family, and I think his mother or mother-in-law was with him. And he approached me and asked if he could help, and I told him my situation. Well, he was kind enough. They loaded me in the car with my bags, took me to their house, and from there I tried calling Scott again. No answer. So he took me to a hotel, dropped me off, and I checked in. I didn't know where to go, didn't know where to check in, nothing. So kind of a negative on Fort Rucker for not having any personnel at the airport. You would think they'd be tracking soldiers coming in, so we would know where to go and how to get to Fort Rucker to be checked in. So here I am, Friday night in a hotel, which was kind of nice. It was my first time having some privacy. I actually had a TV for the first time in a couple of months, and kept calling Scott, and again, no answer. And I thought I would try one last time, and that time I got a busy signal. So I knew he was home, and what I found out later is that he was on his phone with his wife at the time, and wondering where I was. I don't know if we had screwed up our communication, or I had told him a wrong time, or he had heard a wrong time, or whatever. He thought I was going to be in earlier in the day, and obviously I wasn't. But I tried one last time after the busy signal, and he answered. And he asked me where I was, and I said, I'm at some hotel in I couldn't remember the name of the town. And he just started screaming because I was actually about 6 blocks from where he was living. So Scott came and got me. We, I think, drove around that area. I believe was a dry county or dry area. But we did find some beer and talked and drove around and probably had a couple of beers. Maybe I don't know if we were drinking in the car or back at his place or whatever. And then later that evening, he took me back to the hotel and got to bed, got to sleep. But the next morning, he came and got me. I went to the quarterly room at Fort Rucker, checked in, and the young soldier there had no clue. He assigned me my room number, which was 308, and the building. And I went, dumped my stuff off, locked it up, He had no clue if anybody else from my class was around and told me to be back at 1800 or 6 p.m. on Sunday. So I went back to Scott's house and spent the weekend with him. And then when I came back later that night, it was probably after 1800, after 6 p.m. Maybe that soldier didn't tell me a time to be back. Well, when I got back, there were 2 other soldiers in my room. There were 4 beds in there, 2 bunk beds. And introduced myself, and they said that I shouldn't have been out, but I was. Nobody knew about it. But anyway, not a big deal. I had a good weekend with Scott, and kind of acclimated to Fort Rucker. So I wasn't supposed to be out that first weekend, but I was, and here we go. We kicked the 8-week program off. The first 2 weeks was all classroom, and again, we're learning how to crew and fix and repair OH-58 helicopters. And what was interesting is the first 2 weeks of advanced individual training, our class, and my class size, I can't remember. It was less than a dozen guys in my class, maybe 8 or 10. We were supposed to be confined to the barracks, to the company area on weekends. Well, the first weekend came around, and myself and a couple of other soldiers approached our drill sergeant. And these drill sergeants are a little bit more relaxed than the guys that we had at basic training. But my drill sergeant, his last name was Perdices. And he was a jungle expert. I looked up to him. He looked very fit. He just got this feeling he was someone that was approachable. And so I approached him along with these other 2 guys, asking if I could have a few hours off on Saturday. We had a drill and ceremony thing we had to do in the morning, and then the rest of the weekend would be ours, but we were confined to the company area. But I did approach him and ask if I could just have a few hours to see Jill. Again, she was coming down. She was going to stay with Scott and Judy. Well, when I approached him, he told the 3 of us that when he was in jungle school, his wife was pregnant and having their, I believe, first child. And his leadership did not allow him off to be a part of the birth of his child, and that he truly believed that no one should be denied seeing their family. And I carried that with me throughout my career. I always told my soldiers that family was first, and I'll get into that later in some other podcasts. But for me, that meant a lot, and I thought, wow, he's going to give me a couple hours off. And unbeknownst to me, and surprisingly, he gave me and the others off until I believe it was Sunday night at 6 p.m. So I would have, I was expecting a couple of hours on Saturday to be able to see Jill, and here I am. I'm going to be able to spend the evening with her and out with Scott and Judy and her. And I didn't have to be back until 6 p.m. on Sunday night. So that was really cool. And that has stuck with me, like I said, throughout my entire career. And actually, when I was working at the Pentagon, I was able to look Drill Sergeant Perdices up, and I reached out to him. I believe he's living in Louisiana. And but he never responded. But I just wanted to tell him, where I got to in my career, and thank him for instilling that family first thought process in me throughout my career. And I just wanted to see if I could touch base with him and thank him. So that was very kind of him, and I appreciated it. And it was nice to see Jill after having not seen her since graduation at Fort Bliss. So it was nice to see her again. Like I said, the first 2 weekends of AIT were classroom, and we were to be confined to the company area. Well, like I said, the first weekend I was with Jill. The second and third weekend I wasn't confined. And let me back up. So again, supposed to be confined for 2 weekends. For some reason, my class was confined for 5 weekends. Well, the first weekend, again, I'm with Jill. Weekends 2 and 3, again, supposed to be confined. Week 2, I was part of a running team that finished 3rd in some event, and so we got that weekend off, me and the other guys that were in that group. And then the 3rd weekend, I had somehow either applied or been selected to take part in April's Soldier of the Month, and I won that competition. It was based on appearance and answering some questions and being interviewed and so on and so forth. And I can remember the day I competed for that and was selected. Again, this was another Friday, and my drill sergeant was extremely happy with the results. And because of that, we went back to our the building where his office was and where our rooms were. And all of my classmates were out in the field doing common task training. And so again, this is Friday afternoon, I don't know, 3, 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And I asked him, what my orders were, where he wanted me to be. And he said, "You're off until Monday at 6 a.m. I couldn't believe it. And so I had another full weekend off, got a hold of Scott, and he came and picked me up, and I spent the entire weekend with him and Judy, and didn't have to be back, like I said, till Monday morning at 8 o'clock. I think there was a weekend 4, I was probably had nothing to do and was confined. And then weekend 5, I don't know, I can't remember the reason why, but I was off that weekend too. So out of the 5 weekends that my class was confined, and it wasn't discipline, it was just we couldn't leave the company area. Out of those 5 weekends, I actually was off for 4 of those and only confined to the company area just 1. So it was pretty nice to not have to stick around the company area. And it was wonderful having Scott and Judy down there, as I was able to go to their house and spend the weekend and put on civilian clothes, watch TV, and go out to eat and do whatever we were doing at Fort Rucker. Like I said, Scott was down there going through flight school to learn how to fly helicopters. So it was wonderful. Like I said earlier too, that the class was small. After the first 2 weeks, the final 6 weeks was actually working on Scout helicopters and being tested. And our final test, I can remember that this was somewhat nerve-wracking because the class worked on a actual running OH-58 Kiowa. And after we completed whatever fixes had to be done to the helicopter, they actually took it out, and a pilot would take it up in the air and had to hover with it while we were out standing watching this. So I'm sure everything was looked over, but we still had this feeling of, oh my gosh, this is the helicopter we just worked on, and now they're going to take it up in the air. So it was a little bit nerve-wracking to ensure that that thing was going to fly. And it did, and we all passed. And so that basically was our 8 weeks. It was a lot of fun when we were in the hangar working on these helicopters. Some of the new guys, we'd play tricks on them, or people that didn't really understand what we were doing, we'd have them go look for rotor wash or, something goofy, and just a lot of goofing around, a lot of work, reading manuals and actually working on the helicopters. It was a lot of fun, and I learned a lot and enjoyed it immensely. It was more of obviously a gentleman's course or a schoolhouse. Very different than what basic training was down at Fort Bliss. So a nice change, and a nice way to wrap up my time away from home. And I completed AIT in May of 1988. This episode is going to be a little bit shorter just because AIT, not a lot going on, but I wanted to share my progression of my military career with you. I do want to talk briefly about my 2 roommates, and their last names were Molman and Zimmerman. These were the 2 guys I met the first night I went back. They actually turned out to be really cool guys, and the 3 of us had a good time. And, we'd obviously go to class together and spend our evenings together and so on and so forth. And I can remember we were down in the drill sergeant's office, and I've got some pictures. I don't know if I'll post these because they're kind of goofy looking, but all 3 of us were wearing the drill sergeant hats, and, just remembering cleaning the room and working on the air conditioner in March and April. It was so warm down there, and taking pictures of the guys when they were on the toilet or in the shower. It sounds goofy, but, just goofy stuff that military would do. One thing I wanted to share with you that we would do towards the middle and end of our time at Fort Rucker is at noon, we would go eat lunch, and then we would have enough time to go back to our room and lay down for a few minutes. Well, a lot of the days we would open up our blinds just a little bit so we could see out, and we would yell nasty stuff at soldiers down below in the grassy common area, and they wouldn't know where the yelling was coming from. But on one particular day, we were giving some soldier a hard time, and we could see he was looking around up at our building and towards our window. Well, he must have pinpointed the room where the yelling was coming from, because all of a sudden he dropped what he was doing and came charging into the building. And we were like, oh my God. And so we hopped in our bunks pretended we were sleeping, and shortly after, our door came flying open, and here comes this soldier in, and we all kind of lifted up our heads like we had been sleeping, and we're like, what the hell's going on? What the fuck? And he kind of stood there like, I knew it was you guys, but I don't know for sure if it was you guys. And I'm sure some words were said like, hey, man, it wasn't us. We were sleeping. And he eventually did exit and went on his way. But it was just kind of humorous how we would yell derogatory, nasty stuff at people down below. And just this one particular day where a soldier pinpointed where where the yelling was coming from and actually barged into our room, and he wanted to fight. But we pretended we were sleeping. So again, a lot of fun. 8-9 week program at Fort Rucker working on helicopters. And when I came home, this will be an episode down the road, I never went back to the 147th Aviation. I was talked to by Scott and his dad, Colonel Dave Tuttle, and encouraged to go to officers' school. So right after I returned in May from Fort Rucker, I went off to Volkfield Camp Williams to my officer candidate course, and that begins in July of '88, and we'll get to that in episode 5, but I did want to talk real quickly about my next episode. I'm going to take a deviation from my career and just talk about a 3-week time frame when I was able to go to Korea for a training event and go up to the demilitarized zone, the DMZ. So in my next episode, hope you tune in, I'm going to talk about Korea and some of what I did there. A lot of it's classified, but I can tell you what it was like and briefly a little bit about what I was doing. And then I really want to spend probably the bulk of the podcast talking about a trip I took up to the DMZ and just how surreal it was to be looking into North Korea. And we'll talk about that in episode 4, which will air on Monday, 2 February. So again, thank you for tuning in. Again, a brief podcast, but I wanted to stay in the progression of my military career and tell you what happened right after basic training. And again, my time down at Fort Rucker, Alabama, completing my AIT 67 Victor course. And like I said, I'll throw on some pictures, and hope you enjoyed this brief one, and we'll be back again in a couple of weeks. Just want to remind you, the other podcast that I have with Tom Williams is The Colonel and Mr. Big, and we talk about a variety of stuff. So that's available on Spotify and YouTube. And my podcast here is just available on YouTube right now. So again, thanks for listening, and have a great day.